Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Internet Computer Developer Journey. In today's episode 4.1, using the ICP Ledger, we're going to talk about how you can deploy a local version of the ICP Ledger and interact with it for local testing. So before we jump in, let's first review what the ICP token is. So ICP is the native token of the Internet Computer. It's used for three key functionalities on the network. First is facilitating the network's governance through neuron staking, which we're going to take a look at in 4.4 NNS governance and staking. ICP is also used to pay for a canister's resources by converting ICP tokens into cycles using a conversion rate with XDR, which is a suite of different stable coins that allows the price of cycles to be fairly consistent. And we talked about cycles and how ICP can be converted into cycles in the module 1.4 acquiring and using cycles. And then lastly, ICP is also used to reward NNS participants. So if you partake in the NNS governance model by either staking rewards in neurons or actively participating in voting proposals, ICP is also used as a reward in that manner on the NNS as well. And we're also going to talk about that in 4.4 as well. So in order to interact with the ICP token, such as if you want to convert it into cycles or send it to another account, you're going to need to use a specialized canister called the ICP Ledger. A ledger canister is used to hold the ledger accounts and record a traceable history of all ICP transactions. Ledgers are not only used for the ICP token, but they're used for any token on the network. So any ICRC token, any chain key token, since those are ICRC compliant. And so we're going to today take a look at how we can deploy a local instance of the ICP Ledger and interact with it for local testing. But it is noted that this workflow isn't necessary to be deployed on the mainnet, since on the mainnet you're just going to be using the mainnet ICP Ledger. However, for ICRC tokens, you can deploy your own ICRC ledger on the mainnet to create your own ICRC compliant token, and we're going to be taking a look at that in the next chapter, 4.2 ICRC tokens. So before we get into the interactive portion of today's tutorial, first we need to go through a couple terms. First is going to be accounts. So an account on the ICP Ledger is identified by what is known as an account identifier value, and this is derived from the owner's ICP principal and sub-account identifier. Accounts can only be owned by one principal, however, a principal can have several sub-accounts, and since a principal can also refer to a canister, joint accounts can be implemented as a canister. So if you have a canister set as the account identifier, you can have multiple principals be controllers of that canister, thus making it a joint account per se. And that principal can also have multiple sub-accounts, and sub-accounts are optional. A principal does not necessarily need to have a sub-account. If you're familiar with the Ethereum or Bitcoin ecosystems, you are used to hearing accounts as the user's public key. And so the principal identifier on ICP can be thought of as the ICP equivalent. When you use a principal, your corresponding secret key is used to sign messages, authenticate with the ledger, and execute the transactions on your account. Within the ICP Ledger canister, there are three types of transactions. Minting transactions are used to generate a new token for an account. Burning transactions eliminate a token from existence. And a transferring transaction transfers ICP between different accounts. All transactions are recorded on the Ledger canister as a hashed blockchain. This means that when a state change is recorded, each new transaction is inserted into a block and assigned a unique index value. The entire blockchain is authenticated regularly by signing the latest block using a signature, and that signature can be verified by anyone that has the root public key of ICP. The ledger can also be queried to retrieve specific transactions, and we're also going to talk about the role of the index canister in a later tutorial as well. So to deploy the ICP Ledger locally, there are two different workflows. You can use the dfx-nns command to deploy the entire instance of the NNS locally. And since the ICP Ledger is part of the NNS, it will install the ICP Ledger canister as part of that process. That is a pretty straightforward workflow since it doesn't require any manual installation of WASM or Candid files, but it is fairly heavyweight since it installs several things in addition to the Ledger canister. As an alternative, you can also deploy just the ICP Ledger canister using the WASM file. This is the method we're going to be using in today's tutorial since it provides greater control over the deployment, such as defining the Ledger's minting account, customizing the initialization arguments, and choosing which version of the WASM module to use. It is noted that the ICP Ledger canister that's running on the mainnet is not meant to be used for other token deployments. It contains legacy code designed to be backwards compatible, and it should not be used for developing new ledgers. If you want to deploy a new token or a ledger, the ICRC ledger can be used, and we're going to be covering that in the next module 4.2. So the reason that you would deploy the ICP Ledger locally is if you have a project or a dApp that is looking to integrate with the ICP Ledger on the mainnet. And if you are in the early stages of developing that app and you don't want to waste cycles by going through several iterations, having a canister deployed on the mainnet and having to apply several changes and upgrades, then you can deploy the ICP Ledger locally, run all of your testing and making all of your changes locally without having to burn all of those cycles, and then deploying your canister once you've confirmed that it works properly with the local version you have deployed. So before we get started, make sure that you have set up your developer environment according to the instructions in 0.3 Developer Environment Setup. And then we are going to open a new window. I'm going to navigate into my developer journey subdirectory. And then I'm going to create a new project with DFX. So I'm going to use DFX. Well, actually, first I'm going to start DFX. So DFX start, clean background. And for reference, we can see that I am running DFX version 0.20.0. And then we're going to use DFX new to create a new project. I'm going to call this ICP _ledger _ canister. And for this, we're going to select Motoko as the backend. And then we aren't going to be having any front end code or functionality in this example. So we're going to say no front end canister. And then we're not going to be adding any additional features. So I'm just going to hit enter and create that new project. And then I'm going to use CD and then ICP Ledger canister to navigate into this new directory. So next we need to download the Ledger's WASR and Candid files from the latest replica version. And so I can tell you right now that the ones in this tutorial are going to be outdated. So I'm going to go to the dashboard and I'm going to scroll down to the latest OS version that is listed if we sort newest to oldest. And as of this recording, it is June 2024. And so this is going to be the latest one here. And so I'm going to take this commit hash of that. So I'm going to be taking this URL and I'm going to be opening the project's dfx.json file. So I'm just going to open that. Actually, we'll open it in VS Code. So I'm just going to open and let's see, find my developer journey folder and my ICP Ledger project and open that up. And then open up dfx.json, and I'm going to take this URL for the WASM, and I'm going to, well, actually first I'm going to go down here and I'm going to copy this whole content. I'm going to erase the existing content in the file and replace it with this. And so then we can see that I've already got two URLs in here. I'm actually going to turn on, let's see, text warp here so we can see the full text without having to scroll across the window. And so I'm going to take this release note hash here, and I'm going to insert it into these URLs, replacing the other ones. And I'm going to save that with Control S. And so now we have this file ready to go. And then next, in order to interact with the ledger, we need to create a new identity that's going to act as the minting account. And then we're going to export that account's ID as the environment variable minter account ID. So we're going to go back to our terminal. And we are going to do dfx identity new minter. I most likely already have it existing, but that's okay. We're going to use dfx identity use minter to switch to that identity, and then export minter account ID equals $ forward parenthesis dfx ledger account hyphen ID with a closing parenthesis. And so any transfer that's made from this minting account is going to make a mint transaction, and then transfers that are made to the minting account are going to be a burn transaction. And so then we're going to switch back to our dev journey identity, and we're going to export that account ID as the environment variable default account ID. So dfx identity use dev journey, and then export default account ID equals $ forward parenthesis dfx ledger account hyphen ID with a closing parenthesis. And so now we're going to deploy our canister, and we're going to be deploying it with some arguments to initialize the ledger canister. And to do that, we're going to have this big long command that is using dfx deploy, the specified canister ID, which is set in our dfx.json file over here. And then we are going to call the name of that canister the ICP Ledger canister. And then we're going to use the argument flag, and then we're going to use this big long set of variables that are going to initialize our ledger canister. And in this, we can see the minter account ID and the default account ID are passed. And so since this is a big piece of code and it has some very specific formatting in the sense that it is escaping double quotes and things of that nature, I'm just going to copy this code block and paste it directly into my terminal window to avoid having any typos. And so we're going to see that it's going to be deploying the ledger canister, creating the canister, and installing the code for the canister. And then we can see that the minting account is set to this ID. And then it has the init function being ran. And it's going to be using the default maximum message size since we didn't set any of that in our variables. And another important note is when we initialize this, we had to input a token symbol and a token name. And in this example, we just called it LICP or local ICP. And remember that this is only used for local testing purposes. This isn't used to deploy a new instance of ICP or mint ICP that can be used on the mainnet. So now we're going to interact with our ICP Ledger canister that's deployed locally. To do this, we can use the dfx ledger command, which is a shortcut for interacting with the ledger. We can also use the dfx canister command to make calls directly to the ledger canister. We can use the Candid UI. We can use nns-js to interact with it from a web app, or we can use the IC CDK to make intercanister calls from another canister. So for this example, we're going to use the dfx ledger command. So if we use dfx ledger, and then we use the command account ID. It's going to return our default account ID. So this is the principal identifier for our dev journey identity. Then we can take a look at the account balance. So DFX Ledger, and then here we can either pass the network IC command to use the mainnet ledger, or we can take a look at our balance for the local ledger. So first let's look at the local ledger, and let's look at balance. And we're going to need to replace account ID with this account ID that we just had returned to us in the terminal. And so here we can see that we have 100 ICP, since that was the amount that we ended up initially minting from our local instance of the ledger. We can see that we minted 100 ICP tokens to our default account. And so then if we run the same command, but now we want to check our balance on the mainnet ledger, we'll see that we do not have 100 ICP on the mainnet. So let's do network IC. And instead we can see that this account, for example, has 18 ICP. So now if we want to transfer tokens from one account to another, we can use DFX Ledger transfer with the amount flag, and we're going to be doing this on the local. So we're just going to, I'm going to transfer 40. And then we can also pass a memo flag to tell them what the reason for sending these tokens is. And it would help if I typed memo instead of meme for the flag. And we'll just do developer journey, which I'm probably going to need to put in quotes to use that space character. And then we want to transfer this to the minting account. Remember, transfers to the minting account are going to be burn transactions, but since we're just developing things locally and this isn't real ICP, it's okay if we burn some. And so I'm just going to copy this principal ID that was returned here saying minter account is this. So I'm just going to take this and then paste it. And we can see that my memo value in quotes was not well received. So maybe it didn't want my quotes. Maybe we'll just get rid of those quotes and see if it liked that instead. It still didn't. Must be a non-negative whole number. Okay, I guess this doesn't take text, which is interesting. So we'll just do memo 1 and see if that takes it. And it did, and we can see that it has some sort of problem. Okay, so it didn't like me burning the ICP to the minter account. So let's try a different principal ID then. Let's do DFX identity, use default, and let's just do DFX Ledger account ID and DFX identity use. We'll go back to our dev journey identity, and then let's run this same command, but now instead of using that minter address, let's just use this default principal and see if that transfer, okay. And so transfer sent at block height 1. So since the ledger knows that transferring the tokens to the minting address is going to be a burn transaction, it looks like something wasn't initialized correctly, since it was giving this error, fee for burning should be 0. So that looks like something that needs to be explicitly set somewhere in the initialization, since here we can see a transfer fee is set. And so there is a fee for sending tokens to someone else. And since I was sending it to the Minter account, which is a burn transaction, it's giving me an error that I shouldn't be paying this transaction fee for burning tokens. The fee should instead be set to 0. So that is a good thing to take note of. And sounds like a good revision for the text portion of this tutorial. So now we can use DFX canister to call additional methods of the ledger canister, like we can call the token name by using DFX canister call ICP Ledger canister name. And we can see that the token name is local ICP. And then we can return the token symbol by calling directly the canister's ID instead of the name, DFX canister call. And I'm just going to copy the token's ID here, or not the token's ID, the canister's ID here, and then the method symbol, and it's just some empty parentheses. And we can see that symbol is returned as LICP. Next, we can look at the canister's archives by using that same command, DFX canister call. But instead of symbol, we're going to use archives and then that same empty parentheses. And we're just going to see this returned as an empty vector since there are no archives that have been created thus far. So as an alternative to using the DFX Ledger command, we can instead use the DFX canister call command with the transfer method in order to make the same transfer that we used the DFX Ledger command for. It is important to note that using the DFX canister call method will require some additional parameters to make that transaction. And this may be necessary for different code workflows, but for simple interactions via the command line, the DFX Ledger command makes things a little bit simpler. And then you can check the balance in the same way that we checked the account balance with DFX Ledger, only similar to the transfer method. If you're going to use DFX canister call, it's going to require a bit more of code for that workflow. Then lastly, you can use the Candid UI to interact with the local ledger canister. And so for this example, if we go back up to where the canister was first deployed, we can open that URL in our web browser and we can interact with the UI methods and query things directly. And so if we see I hit query, but there wasn't any account identifier in here, and so it gave me that error. So if we go down to where we transferred some local ICP to this default account ID, if we insert that and then hit query. So since I inputted the account address directly in here, I'm not using the right data type. It wants the account ID in a different format for normal account balance. But if we go down to account balance DFX and I insert the principal and then hit query, we see that I get the correct response of what would be 40 ICP or local ICP tokens. Then we can also take a look at the archives, which are still empty. And then we can take a look at some of the other methods that the ICP Ledger has included, such as the list of supported ICRC standards. And we can see that the ICP Ledger supports the ICRC1 and ICRC2 ledger standards. And then there are several other methods here that are required for the ICP Ledger to support. But for the sake of our tutorial, that is where we'll end things today. And in the next tutorial, we will dive into using the ICRC ledger, deploying a local instance of that, and then deploying our own unique token to that local ledger. And that unique token you can then deploy to the mainnet with your own custom ICRC ledger. So that's where we'll begin next week's tutorial. If you enjoyed today's tutorial, be sure to like and subscribe to the DFINITY YouTube channel. Be sure to check out the DFINITY Developer Discord server or participate in the developer forum. If you have questions or comments on the developer journey series, there are forum posts and Discord conversations for the series that you can ask questions in and talk to other developers on their developer journeys. That'll wrap up this week. Take care.